All right, so lotus pose is impossible to do safely. Let's talk about how the hip joint moves. So here is a breakdown of the hip joint. Basically, you've got the femur, which is your thigh bone, and you've got the acetabulum, which is the joint that the femur fits into on the pelvis bone. So this would be the right half of the pelvis, this is the right leg, and this is how it moves. It moves in a ball and a socket. So you have a few different types of motion that you can get out of the femur. You can flex and extend, which if this is the pelvis, you're looking at this pelvis straight on. You're looking from an anterior view. So the pelvis at the hip joint, you can flex and extend so that it can move forward and backwards. You can abduct, you can move sideways, and you can adduct, so you can move out and back. You can rotate as well, and this is where we're really concerned with Lotus, is this rotational component in the hip joint. Okay, so let's first start with the tenet that, excuse me, there's one other joint that we really need to talk about. So that's the motion of the hip joint. Then we have the knee joint, and the knee here is essentially a hinge joint. Basically, the knee can flex and extend. Okay, it can bend, you can bend your knee, and you can straighten your knee. The knee ideally is used as a hinge joint. If you start to use the knee as a rotational joint, if you start to rotate the knee, which you can do a little bit, you can rotate a little bit, and there's a little bit of play side to side. But there shouldn't be when the leg is straight, that's for certain. That's when these ligaments are most tight. But when the knee starts to shuffle side to side, or when the knee starts to rotate, then we start really increasing the risk of injuries. So we want to use the knee as a hinge joint when at all possible. Any other use of the knee is likely to steer us towards injury. So if we take the hip joint and we look at the full range of motion of the hip joint, the American Association of Orthopedic Surgeons has outlined full range of motion for this joint as being when we are rotating, when we're talking about internal and external rotation, a normal healthy individual who doesn't have any congenital abnormalities or any strange variations in their bone structure or anything, a typical human being, ideally should have about 45 degrees range of motion. I'll show you what that looks like on me. So if I take my knee out here, I should be able to drop it out 45 degrees, and I should be able to inwardly rotate it 45 degrees. I'll show you from another view. So if I'm this way, I should be able to take my knee and go out 45 degrees. I should be able to take my knee and go in 45 degrees. Okay, 45, 45. So I have 45 degrees range of motion rotationally side to side at the hip joint. So that's ideal. Now let's just assume that, accounting for anatomical variations, that you could safely move past that 45 degrees. That some people just have a more shallow acetabulum. So in other words, you're gonna have more range of motion before bony parts of the femur start to hit bony parts of the acetabulum. So you might, let's pick a number here. If 45 is normal, let's give about 10% margin of error and round that up to 50 degrees. So let's say that you can get 50 degrees internal and external rotation. In order to do Lotus, let's see what it would demand of the hip joint. Remember, in Lotus, when we take the knee and we flex the knee and then take the foot across the body, we do not want to be putting any lateral stress on the knee. We do not want to take the leg, pull it up, rotate it, and then torque it, right? We don't want to shear, and we don't want to torque by rotating. So no rotation, no shear. In order to do that, though, let's look on Fred here and see what would have to happen. So if we take the femur here on Fred, and we flex the, here, I'm going to try and get this a little closer. So if we take Fred's femur, okay, and let's get this out of here. it's in his acetabulum here. Now we flex the knee up here. This is what you'll be taught. You'll be taught to pull the thigh in and brace the leg like this, and then rotate, and then place the foot, then take this foot and put it across the body for Lotus. That's what is being taught, basically, in order to brace the knee. The thing is, that is impossible. And here's why. Because first, we flex the hip. So now we've put some stress on the back part of the ligaments of the hip. So there's already reduced mobility from here. Now, from a flex position, remember, we have not rotated the femur at all. This is at 0 degrees rotation. Now, remember, we had 45 degrees, maybe 50 if you're really flexible. So from a flex position, now we start to rotate at the femur. So 45 degrees gets us to here. So I'm going to try and take 45 degrees and get into Lotus. And you actually can't. Here, let's see if I can do this. From 45 degrees, the foot is below the knee. But in order to get Lotus, I have to pull the foot up and then cross it over, right? So in order to do that, I actually, and I'll show you on a different model because this one is harder to navigate. If I have my hip here, here, and here's the femur, then here we are. If I pull this up, I flex it, then I rotate. Let me see if I can get the white balance to be better here. Here. No? Okay. Well, if I flex at the hip and then I rotate at the thigh, as soon as I start to rotate, this is 45 degrees, but in order to get my leg across for Lotus pose, I have to actually rotate past that 45 degree point, that's normal healthy range of motion, and I have to actually rotate to about 90 degrees, which is impossible. Nobody's hip can do that. Unless one of two things happens. Either, A, you start to stretch the ligaments that surround your hip joint. You stretch them so much that you can actually rotate to 90 degrees in the hip joint. Remember, here's normal, and then there's, well, I can only go to maybe 50 or 60 degrees, but I could force it further. I could grab my leg and I could bring it to 90. But what's really happening, I've stretched out my ligaments of my hip, so my hip is too mobile. It's flaccid, it's weak. And in addition to stretching out the hip capsule, now not only is my hip capsule too loose, right, in order to pull the leg across into Lotus, but in addition to that, now I'm straining the ligaments of the knee in order to pull my foot across like this, right? So it's just math. Like, in order to get the hip flexed and rotated past 45 degrees, when 45 degrees is full normal range of motion according to the American Association of Orthopedic Surgeons, in order to get it to 90 degrees, and then further, right, because 90 would only get my foot here. It wouldn't get my foot up into my hip socket on the other side, right? So the only reason I'm able to do this is because my hip ligaments are too loose. I've loosened them over time by gradually doing more yoga and more yoga over time. Yeah, so Leslie Kaminoff talks about this too. But what Leslie Kaminoff essentially says is that you can get one leg in. I'm arguing that you can't even get one leg into Lotus without damaging your ligaments. Leslie Kaminoff says that if you tuck the hip in and then keep this as one section and then rotate it, now I can get one hip in. But the problem is that if the hip joint is designed for about 45 degrees range of motion, and then I start rotating, 45 degrees, boom, that's 45 degrees. I can't get into Lotus with 45 degrees range of hip motion. I need more. I need like 90 or 110 degrees. So that motion has to come from somewhere. Either that motion is going to be coming from progressively stretching the ligaments of my hip joint, which we know that the ligaments, if you stretch them out over time, it's like stretching a plastic bag, and they don't go back. They don't rebound back to their normal tension, and you need that tension to hold your joints into play. So in addition to stretching out our ligaments and destabilizing our hips, most likely what's really happening is a combination of things. You're destabilizing the hip joint, but you're also putting that pressure on the that tensile pull on the lateral compartment of the knee. So as you rotate the hip over, you're pulling on the capsule of the hip here, but you're also pulling apart the lateral compartment of the knee and compressing the medial compartment of the knee. So you're wearing down the meniscus, the medial meniscus of the hip, and creating a tensile strength or a pulling apart of the lateral side. And there's probably some side-to-side shifting as well. We call that shear. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening in the knee joint that is not ideal for the knee joint. Remember, the knee joint ideally works as a hinge, and that's it. As soon as you start to, and there should be a little tiny bit of rotation in the knee, and that's okay. Like, that's how we can squat. If I squat, I don't just flex and extend, right? If I squat into a deep squat, watch my knees. My knees do turn out, and then I'm able to squat down. In order to do that with my feet pointing straight forward, I have to have some tibial rotation, and it torques the capsule of my knees, and that's actually okay. But you don't want to push it. You don't want to push it so much that then you can not just do Lotus. Right now, you're not just putting a leg into the Lotus position, but now we're doing this like putting our feet behind our head, and we're starting to do all these really kind of far out things with our bodies as well. So I used to practice all the Ashtanga yoga and all the poses where we're doing, feet behind the head. I used to practice all these poses, and now it's really starting to catch up with me. And I'm not the only one. A lot of really prominent teachers are starting to have hip surgeries, are starting to come out and tell their stories about, essentially this mindset of like, I have to get the next pose, I have to keep pushing myself, I have to get, they associate their spirituality with the depth of their yoga pose, but it's stupid, and it gets people hurt to value the craziness of your pose as some notch on your belt, some form of some trophy or something of spiritual attainment or something. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense biomechanically. It doesn't make any sense in the joints, the anatomy, and it's hurting people, and it's distracting from probably the more profound teachings and substance of yoga, and that is that yoga can help us to influence and control our autonomic nervous system, which is an incredible thing, that our autonomic nervous system really is supposed to be this autonomic. It's supposed to be beyond our control. We shouldn't be able to voluntarily change our heart rate, but we can. We can through breathing techniques, and that's incredible. And we can start to induce the mammalian dive reflex to lower our heart rate and get certain autonomic responses. We can do that with cold showers. We can do that with certain breathing techniques. I did a breathing technique when I was teaching in a yoga teacher training last year, where I had my heart rate monitor on, and I did the Wim Hof breathing, where you basically go, you do that about 40 times, and then you exhale, hold your breath on the exhale for as long as you can, and then take a big breath in, and so on. And my heart rate went from a resting heart rate of about 70 beats per minute, dropped down to about 40 beats per minute. 40 beats per minute. That is like almost alarmingly low. And then when I breathed again, it went, or when I was doing the huffing and puffing part, it was about 150 beats per minute, and I was laying down the whole time. So these are things that, like, yoga's amazing. We can start to really shape our physiology and shape our mindset and our relationship to various difficult situations. And we don't need to impose dangerous, difficult situations upon ourselves to gain that control. And I think that's the joy of it. And I know that was for me when I did the crazy poses. That was a source of, like, wow, I'm capable of doing this amazing thing. And I never thought that I was capable of doing this. And it was, it felt empowering, but in the end, it ended up just being destructive. So if there are any questions or anything like that, I'm happy to answer them on the hip joint or on any of this hypermobility. But essentially, the push in yoga to just glorify hypermobility and flexibility is it's stupid, it's uninformed, and it's missing the point of yoga. So, yeah, cool. If there aren't any questions, then I am going to end this one, and feel free to ask them later. I know I've posted a lot of like hypermobility stuff recently, so cool.